All right, hello everyone. Sorry that we couldn't do this live. Ended up with another commitment today that involved some applied learning and a field trip down to Kansas City with a number of students. For those that I haven't met, I'm Mike Ducey. I am the director for the Griffon Office of Applied Learning. And I am going to run you through the internship crash course over the next 50 minutes or so. And we'll talk about how to develop and maintain an internship program that advances student learning. For those of you that may already be actively engaged with internship programs in your department, then that's awesome. So some of this may be a bit of review, although I hope that you'll find some tools that may help make your internship program a little bit easier to manage and perhaps a little bit more robust. For those of you that are new to the internship process, hopefully we can provide a bit of a path for you to begin to engage students in internship experiences if they are appropriate for your particular programs. So with that, we'll go ahead and jump in, and I think it's more than appropriate to start with what is an internship. And then we're going to do a what's not an internship, because I think that's really important for us to distinguish what the internship is as we move through this discussion. I will say also at the beginning of this that I'm primarily focusing on credit-bearing internship experiences as we go through this, okay? So more structured experiences. So what's an internship? An internship is a learning experience for our students. And as such, it should be that extension of a classroom. They should be using the knowledge that they've gained in the classroom setting as part of their earlier training to employ that in a real-world setting. So we want them to be taking those skills and going out there and doing them in the workplace. An internship, especially these credit-bearing internships, they should have a defined beginning and an end. And those defined beginnings and ends generally should align with the beginning and end of a semester. It is possible to work outside of the limits of the semester, but it's much easier to work within those confines. There should be a job description associated with an internship. It is an employment position, and as such, it should have a job description and include all of the aspects that would normally be included in the job description. So there should be a set of desired qualifications, what the student will be engaged in. All of those kinds of things should be part of that early step in the internship process. We'll talk a lot about this next bullet, but having sets of clearly defined objectives and goals really ties this back to the learning experience. So without some defined learning objectives and goals, then it's really less an internship and more an employment opportunity. Not that there's anything wrong with those, but we want to have these credit-bearing internships associated with learning objectives. So it's fitting our applied learning criterion. With an internship, there should be supervision as part of that. And ideally, that supervision is occurring both within the company or organization that the student is engaged in their internship with, so that they have that professional on-site supervisor who's able to provide guidance, perhaps mentorship, and certainly feedback to the student. And then we want there to be supervision on the education side, on the university side as well, to provide the student with feedback and guidance as it relates to the academic aspects of their experience. There should be routine feedback provided to the student from that supervisor. This is a growth opportunity for the student, and so it's important that they receive regular feedback so that they can grow within that position. And then finally, there should be the appropriate resources and equipment and facilities available for the student to achieve their learning objectives and goals. So we wouldn't want to put a student into a situation where there's no way they could meet their learning objectives because the resources simply are not there for them to be able to do so. So all of these points that I just described to you are points made from from NACE, which provides a lot of guidance around internship experiences. So let's talk about what an internship isn't. An internship is, if it doesn't have defined learning objectives, it's certainly not a credit-bearing internship experience. So because our credit-bearing ones should. An internship it's not an internship, rather, if the experience doesn't utilize the things that they've learned over the course of their academic training in that workplace setting. So, for example, we wouldn't want them simply sharpening pencils because that's really not part of their academic training. So we want them to be able to employ the skills and knowledge that they've gained in the classroom. No feedback for growth. That is a big red flag. And then no reflective component. So again, we want them to have that academic growth. And finally, it's not an internship if it's simply a part-time job. And again, nothing wrong with the part-time job, and certainly does not insinuate that a part-time job couldn't provide or doesn't provide the student with meaningful experience, and perhaps even meaningful experience within the context of their discipline or field. But a part-time job is not, by default, an internship. Okay, so let's kind of talk about what an internship can do for a student. Why should you encourage students to engage in internships in your programs? And first, of course, is that it provides them with workplace experience. So for those students who haven't had an opportunity to go out and be in the workforce and gain that kind of experience, this is an opportunity for them to do so prior to graduation. So it is not only improving their programmatic skill set, it's also providing them with some material to put on their resume to demonstrate that they've got experience for that future employer. It certainly provides an opportunity to explore career options. I wouldn't say that an internship is a bad experience just because the student may encounter something that they decided this wasn't for me, right? That they perhaps thought that they wanted to go into marketing, and they did an experience in marketing and realized that that wasn't something that they were really passionate about. That's almost as positive, quite frankly, because then they know without having to have gone into the workforce and been hired into that first real permanent position, they know something now about where their true passions lie and where they don't. So we get this career exploration. Of course, working in a real world setting, and applying their knowledge and skills is quite important. Ideally, they're going to earn some money when they serve in that internship role. And we'll talk a little bit about paid and unpaid internships in just a moment, and how to recognize when an internship should be paid and what situations are for internships that may not be paid. Expansion of their professional network. Oftentimes students may not realize how important that is, but this is a way for them to begin to connect with professionals in their field of interest, who they may ultimately work for or work with at some point in the future, or if nothing else, they can serve as references for that student after graduation. And then finally, as it relates to the institution, higher rates of persistence, completion, and employment. So there is a lot of evidence in the literature that engaging, that students who engage in internship experiences are more likely to continue in their field of study, to graduate, and then ultimately to become employed following graduation. So with that, let me address the paid versus unpaid internships. This is sometimes a bit of a sticky wicket. So how do you know whether that internship experience should be paid or not? Sort of the short answer is wherever possible, an internship should be a paid experience. And if the student is doing work for an organization, ideally they should be paid for the work that they're engaged in. Now, that noted, the Fair Labor Standards Act identifies some criteria for when an internship may not be a paid internship and when it should be a paid internship. Generally, if an employer that a student is serving in an internship role with is a for-profit entity, then they should be paid for that internship experience. Now, I've given you a bunch of links in this presentation, and we'll share the slides associated with this presentation so that you can go back through it and follow some of these links. But there is a fact sheet, and I'm going to go ahead and pull that up here for us, that is from the U.S. Department of Labor, that talks about that Fair Labor Standards Act and the testing criteria for unpaid interns and students. And so you'll see that there are 7 different criteria that that courts have used to identify as part of that should a student be paid or not. And generally, this is, and by the way, all 7 criteria don't necessarily have to be a determining factor. It could be one of these that's a determining factor. But this is sort of the criteria that if you are looking at a student who is considering an internship position, but they're telling you that it's not a paid position, that we can kind of take a look at the criteria and go, no, you know what, that really should be a paid position. And so perhaps you might want to look at another option, or no, it really is a case where it's not a paid position. I'll give you a couple examples of common unpaid internship experiences. For not-for-profits. A not-for-profit may consistently provide internship experiences for students, but often they are in an unpaid role. Another case where the intern and the employer have an understanding up front that there's no expectation of compensation. I wouldn't encourage necessarily a student to enter into that without some discussion with the faculty members in their program, or perhaps other professionals in their field about whether that is a commonplace practice. And that's sort of one of those criteria is is that the typical practice. So if you're wondering should it be paid, should it not be paid, then pull up fact sheet number 71 and kind of go through the criteria with the student and perhaps with that potential internship host and talk it through. All right, so that's the paid versus unpaid discussion there. So we're going to go into some of the details now associated with internship programs and what you really want to be thinking about as it relates to an internship program in your department or your program areas. And we're also going to talk a lot about the establishing student learning outcomes. I'm really going to focus on the applied learning aspect of this. And before we do that, one of the things that we really should discuss is how do you connect students with opportunities? And whose responsibility is it to do that? And that's another great question. So I'll say up front that it is not the responsibility of the institution or your program to find a student an internship. And certainly we don't want to act as a placement agency for an organization. But what we do want to do is try to facilitate the opportunities and student connections. And so there are a number of ways that we can do that. So one really important aspect of this is for departments that have or that utilize an internship course or that regularly engage students in internship experiences, if at all possible, have a department internship coordinator, have a point of contact that we can direct employers who may come to the institution and say, I've got these internship opportunities, but how do I connect students with those opportunities? Or if we have students who come to our various offices, maybe asking about internship opportunities, that we can connect them with a person. So having a department internship coordinator is extremely helpful. So then in terms of resources, the Career Development Center, of course, is going to be one of those resources that students can utilize to identify internship opportunities. And so within the Career Development Center, of course, if you pull that up, then one of the things that a student will be able to find is the jobs link, and that's going to take them to Handshake. So let me say something about Handshake at this point, that students should have a Handshake profile wherever possible. Employers all across the U.S. utilize Handshake to list employment opportunities, including internships. And so if a student has a profile in Handshake, then they can set that profile up to alert them to specific opportunities, including internship opportunities. And when those opportunities come up, they'll get an alert, and then they can go in and apply or at least investigate that opportunity further. So we really want them to have that Handshake profile. So as your students get closer to those points in their academic career where internships either are required or may be very beneficial to that student, then please be sure that they have that Handshake profile. So after that, the Griffon Office of Applied Learning can assist. But what we've been doing as it relates to this really is to direct either an employer or an organization to a point of contact within a program, or to direct students to points of contact within a program. And so we've just sort of been shuttling those inquiries and questions to the appropriate points on our campus. And so that's where it also is very helpful for us to know who should we send a student to, or who should we send an employer to chat with if they come asking about an internship experience. One that sometimes is is overlooked, and that's the usajobs.gov. And so directing students to the USA Jobs website is very useful because you can just search internship, and then all of these open internship experiences that are occurring within federal agencies will pop up. And of course, students can, if they want to stay local, then they can limit it by region, so on. One of the things that I would note about the government internship experiences, they're almost always paid, but you generally have to apply, the student has to apply pretty far in advance of the experience. And so we definitely want to be driving students towards this resource 4 to 6 months in advance of that internship experience. So there's a few of those resources. For students who are in the Craig School of Business, then they need to work directly with Katie Campbell, who is the internship coordinator in CSB. And Katie will work with them and run them through the CSB process and forms and help them connect with internship experiences. So those are a few of the ways that, that you can connect students with opportunities. Within your own disciplines, you already may have some points of contact within your disciplines that you might encourage students to seek out, and those are great. But again, from the goal office and sort of from the career development side, we're going to try and direct students to your specific programs. All right. So then on to the learning objectives aspect of this. This is perhaps one of the most important things that I want to drive forward with this presentation, and that is that the internship is a learning experience, especially our credit-bearing internships. Let me be specific. Those credit-bearing internships need to have student learning outcomes. And so with those student learning outcomes, I'm going to give you some examples of student learning outcomes that you can consider, or you can work with the student as they're considering, because one of the things that I'll say here before I talk through these student learning outcomes, it is imperative that the student, the site supervisor of that student in the internship organization, and a representative from your program, whatever faculty member or staff member is supervising that internship experience from the academic side, work together to identify the student learning objectives associated with the experience. All right, so when we're thinking about those student learning objectives, how do you get started? So a couple of notes around those. It's important that the learning objectives be specific and measurable statements that are going to say exactly what the student should accomplish or learn during that internship experience. You want to make sure that they're clear, concise, and measurable. We'll talk more about that in just a moment. And that there is some mechanism for the evaluation of that experience. It's my opinion that those student learning outcomes and the associated assessment of those should factor into the assigned grade that the student receives for the experience. But that's my personal opinion. Programmatically, that is something that you may consider. And then finally, as I noted before, that this is a collaborative effort between the student, the faculty advisor, and the internship or internship coordinator and that on-site supervisor to set forward what those objectives are going to be, rather than to have a generic set of objectives. So when you're thinking about those objectives, I gave you the specific, measurable, achievable, etc. So those learning objectives should be SMART goals. And so when we talk about those SMART goals, they should be specific, identifying a specific skill or area that that is being measured. It should be measurable, that there should be some way to identify whether that objective was met, and perhaps even levels to which it was met. It's critical, especially for an internship, it's critical that it be achievable. That can the student accomplish that or meet that objective given the foundational training that they are walking into the experience with, and then the associated resources, training, and environment that's provided by that organization. So we don't want to set a student up for failure in this case. In terms of relevance, can it be achieved within the context of the internship experience? And then finally, can it be achieved during the time constraints associated with the internship experience? So if it's a typical fall or spring term, can it be achieved within the boundaries of that term? Next, when you're writing those learning objectives, ideally you're using Bloom's verbs when you write those, and oftentimes those make it a lot easier to measure if we have the Bloom's verbs associated with them. What I've done here is to provide a link to the revised Bloom's action verbs to help give you some options associated with the Bloom's verbs as you write those student learning objectives. Okay, so then on to the learning objectives themselves. Typically with an internship, that workplace or kind of focused experience, we have three areas that you may create learning objectives within. I would argue that for an internship experience, you kind of try and pick objectives from each of these three areas wherever possible. The first is academic learning objectives, and those academic learning objectives are going to be associated with the academic training that student has engaged in and will engage in as part of the internship experience. So looking at the knowledge and skills that they have, or that the knowledge that they may be acquiring as a result of the experience, applying higher order thinking skills to in the context of their discipline. So those are the kinds of academic learning objectives that we're talking about. So as an example, an academic learning objective may be the student will be able to estimate the cost of a repair. And that would be in the context of whatever that particular discipline and organization was focused on. So academic learning objectives is the first of these three. The next is professional learning objectives. And the professional learning objectives are going to be those associated with working in that professional world. So this is a more broad workplace kinds of skills, or essential workplace skills. However, you want to define those soft skills. Sometimes we refer to those in that way. But those are all those skills that that student is really going to benefit from when they enter the workforce. And so these are focused on things like their oral and written communication skills, working with diverse cultures in diverse environments, interpersonal communication, then effective citizenship, leadership skills, right? So all of that's going to be in this professional learning objective pool. And so one of those may be the student will be able to utilize workplace SOPs, or standard operating procedures. So a general kind of professional learning objective that would be applicable to any environment that they're going to go into, because every environment is going to have the way that they want things done. And so it's important for that student in this case, in this example, to be able to demonstrate that they're able to do so. Oftentimes these professional learning objectives may also be associated with in the context of their discipline. So if a student is working in a scientific setting, then some of these may be more scientific setting specific, just as an example. The third of these are personal learning objectives. And so these are going to be the ones that are about personal growth for the student. Self-awareness, clarifying, identifying values, maybe even realigning values, self-reliance and self-confidence, those kinds of aspects, ethical perspectives. So with these, an example of a personal learning objective would be the student will be able to construct a professional resume. A note about this particular example, I chose it on purpose. It's one that I hope that you would have any student who's engaged in an internship experience be able to do. They should have to construct that professional resume in order to go through the hiring process into the internship position. And then we want them to refine their resume as they move through that internship position to reflect the experience and the skill sets that they have as a result of it. So you have options to choose from as you work with the student and you work with the site supervisor in the host organization about what learning objectives need to be met by that student. In general, we would suggest 4 or 5 learning objectives be identified. You don't want to have too many because we want, again, them to be achievable in the time frame that the student will be engaged in that internship. So then a little bit about who's responsible for what as the student engages in their internship experience. We really sort of have 3 areas that I'm going to focus on. What is the student responsible for? What is the on-site faculty, or sorry, the on-site supervisor or the organization responsible for? And what are we as Missouri Western responsible for? So our expectations of the student are typical expectations that you would have of a student in any academic engagement. Compliance with the syllabus. Now for this, that may be doing things like submitting weekly log reports that allow the student to say what they did and reflect on what they did in any particular week. Submitting midterm reports or reflections, final reports or reflections, whatever that syllabus outlines as expectations of the student, we want them to meet that. It's the responsibility of the student or the expectation that they're going to work with the internship supervisor here at Missouri Western and then their site supervisor to establish learning outcomes. It's important that they have a role in creating those so that they have some ownership associated with those learning outcomes. Then, because they're out there in the workplace, as a Missouri Western student, we want them to be certainly to demonstrate professionalism in the workplace. So that is coming to work appropriately prepared, coming to work on time, working at work when they're supposed to be working, all of those professionalism kinds of things, so that they're positively representing the institution while they're working with that employer. We want the student to communicate with the employer and the internship supervisor on a regular basis And in fact, one of the things that I might encourage you to do is construct your syllabus so that it requires that kind of communication, that regular input from the student and feedback from the student. We certainly want the student to have a good experience, to have a positive academic experience and outcome. But if there's problems along the way, it's really important that we know about those so that we can work to try and resolve any issues. And then finally, they're going to be in the workplace, and so it's critical that they accept the constructive criticism that we want them to receive and use it to improve their performance in the workplace. So that's some of the expectations that we have of the student. In terms of the host organization, what's that employer responsible for? First and foremost, they're responsible for the hiring process. They're going to hire that student, and they're going to go through the hiring process as they would for any other employee. There's a position description, there's associated resume review, there's the interview process if a student makes it through the resume review step, right? So all of those kinds of things that host organization is responsible for. So again, Missouri Western is not a placement agency for that organization. Rather, what we can do is let students know about the opportunity that organization has. Working with a student and the internship coordinator to establish the SLOs, providing an on-site supervisor. It's critical that they provide an on-site supervisor. We don't want a student to come in to work, not have any supervision associated with that work, and consequently not have the opportunity for feedback about their work. We want to be sure that they're engaging the students in an experience that's designed to meet the student learning outcomes. If they're not able to do that, then it doesn't fit that criteria for an internship. It can be a job, it can be a part-time job, it can be a full-time job, whatever, but it's not going to meet the internship criteria at that point. And then providing feedback, providing regular feedback to the student and providing feedback to the university periodically, especially at the end of the experience through a supervisor evaluation of that student intern. That's important for us as an institution to get that feedback. It helps identify if a student met their student learning outcomes, and it gives us a sense of the experience that the employer or that organization had with that Missouri Western student. Then, in terms of the program, so what Missouri Western is responsible for. This is an academic experience, and so there should be an associated syllabus for that experience. Since I'm talking about credit-bearing experiences, if you have a course, an internship course, then you would have that associated syllabus for that internship course. Providing points of contact related to the internship experience so that if an organization needs to reach out about a student or about a situation that they know who to contact. Providing feedback to and supervision to the student as it relates to the academic aspects of the experience. Receiving and evaluating those graded components. The faculty supervisor is going to be the one who does the assessments and assigns the grade with input from that organizational site supervisor. And then finally, they're going to collect that post-internship survey from the student. And it's really important that we have that post-internship feedback. All right, we're getting close to the end here, so a couple things to consider that I haven't already hit on, and I think actually a couple of these I've said before, but we'll reiterate. Please, if you're considering an internship program, engaging your students in these kinds of opportunities, having a dedicated internship coordinator is very beneficial, because then that person understands the cycle associated with the internship process and can be that point of contact for organizations that students may regularly serve in internship roles with. And there you have an identified point of contact for places like the Office of Applied Learning or perhaps Career Development to reach out to about questions associated with your program. You should document the expectations of all parties. And there should be signatures of commitment around these. That relates to the organization and what their expectations are, what the university's expectations are, and what the expectations are of the student as well. So that if there are issues that arise along the way, that we've begun that documentation process. This really has to start earlier than we might typically prepare for an academic term. So internship placements and working with students for those internship, identifying internship opportunities, I really should say that. I shouldn't use the word placement, so forgive me. We really starting to work on this about 4 to 6 months in advance. So knowing when your student or students are going to be ready for that internship experience is really important, so that we're advising them well in advance about, hey, if you're thinking about an internship in the spring, then around September, we really should be talking about opportunities, and you should be out there looking for opportunities to, you as in the student, should be looking for opportunities to serve in an internship role. And then finally, securing the internship position is the student's responsibility. And it's important that it's the student's responsibility, that they go through that hiring process, that they go through the steps associated with that, building their resume, submitting cover letters, engaging in the interview process, all of that. So don't serve as a placement agency is the bottom line there. Allow the student to learn as part of this process. Okay, so the last piece that I'm going to end on here is that the Office of Applied Learning has prepared an internship toolkit. And when you open this document up here, this presentation, these links are going to take you to the various components that we've placed into the Internship Toolkit. Now, I will note when you go to those that they are still in draft form. We're getting close to a point where I'm going to take the draft off of this, but we still have a feedback period going on, and as you review these, if you have comments or feedback, please reach out to the Office of Applied Learning and let us know, and we'll take those into consideration. What we want is for these to be useful documents and tools for programs that are engaging in internships to use. And so we have developed a checklist for programs to help sort of walk you through the internship process and engaging with an organization around a student being placed in an internship role in their organization. So this is also going to do, it's some of the nuts and bolts kinds of things, like what do I need to collect from them? What do I need to know? What's the time scale kind of look like? How many hours should a student work for every credit hour they're enrolled in? It's 45, by the way. And so this document should help walk you through those components. We have an application this is a generic application. So one thing that I'll note is that this toolkit it's just a toolkit. It is not this is how you have to do it. We're providing these documents to you so that you can take and employ them in a way that's appropriate for your programs. And you may not need every single one of these documents, and that's okay. What we're trying to do is sort of reduce the workload associated with your either construction of or operation of your internship program. So a note about the application process here. This begins, as you'll see, that expectations and identifying what the expectations are for the student, for the internship site supervisor. So this is beginning to collect and identify, here's what you need to do, here's what you're responsible for, and please sign this to say that you know that. So the other piece that I would say about this is, and I have to give a huge shout out to the Craig School of Business, because we have borrowed, in some cases liberally, from what CSB has for their internship program to create these documents. But CSB has moved this internship application into a dynamic form for their programs. So if you have enough students going through internship experiences in your programs and you want to move this into a dynamic form, reach out to us and we'll help you through that process. It certainly will cut down on the paperwork and helps guide everyone through the workflow associated with it. I talked about student learning objectives and guides to student learning, to developing those, so there's a guide there. There is student learning objective development form, so when you sit down with that student and their site supervisor and you're creating that, we have a form here that you can catalog those learning objectives, so you can edit the form, and then what those objectives are aligned with as it relates to essential workplace competencies. So, and then again, a place for us to collectively agree upon it, sign that we're agreeing, so that we've got that documentation. There is an employer program agreement that you may or may not find beneficial. This agreement is basically our agreement that we would have the employer sign that says these are the student learning objectives that that the internship experience should engage the students in. And then it also identifies start and end dates associated with it. This also identifies that whether a student is paid or not is not related to the institution. That is an agreement between the student and the organization. They're hiring that student as an employee in this case. So that document you may find useful. Suggestions for graded internship components. Again, this was in part drawn from Craig School of Business and the way that they do this. You may or may not choose to use these, but I think this is a really good model because it causes the student to remain continuously engaged in the reflection and communication about their internship experience. And it also puts weight on the supervisor evaluation associated with that, and then the reporting components that the student has to engage in as well. So it just defines all those things. Report templates for midterm and final reports, and again, those may be things that you want to be unique to your particular disciplines. These are generally focused around workplace competencies and describing how the student is engaged as it relates to those workplace competencies. And then you may also have a reflective component around how it connects with their discipline. An internship supervisor evaluation form for that on-site supervisor, and then finally a post internship survey tool. So we definitely want to get feedback from the student about their internship experience. And so we have that feedback tool available here, and you can add additional questions that you may want to add to this. But it's really important that we get that feedback, so that if there were challenges, that we address those challenges, or that if the experience is extremely positive, that we recognize, hey, this is working, and let's make sure that we continue to move forward in this way. So with that said, then I would open it up electronically for questions and comments. Hopefully you found something useful in this presentation. Certainly if you have questions or comments or additional suggestions, we absolutely welcome those. Just send them to the Office of Applied Learning using the goal@missouriwestern.edu email address. You're always, of course, also always welcome to stop by the Goal office and chat if you would like to do that. And with that, I'm going to go ahead. Thank you for your time and attention, and I hope that you have some excellent positive internship experiences going on in your programs.